everybody. This is Mohanraj and Rosenbaum Are Humans. I'm Marianne Mohanraj.
I'm Benjamin Rosenbaum.
Yeah, and we're here today. We're recording off schedule a little bit because we're recording this on October 18th, 2023, in the wake of the October 7th Hamas attack. It's been a very fraught time for folks in a variety of ways. I've been worrying about Ben, who is Jewish, and I'd actually thought about reaching out to you, and I didn't, which is maybe a topic that's worth talking about. Is like, should be reaching out to our friends who are in the midst of conflict, but Ben suggested maybe we record a podcast of this. So we're here. I feel very ignorant about this conflict. I've done some reading on it and some study, but it's very old and very complex. And I guess I would just want to ask that anyone listening extend us grace. And I will try not to say anything too painfully ignorant. But I can't promise.
I have more of a preamble. I have more of a preamble than that.
Yes.
So for those listening in the far future, it's been a hell of a week. There's conflict broken out once again in the Middle East on kind of a scale that in some sense we haven't seen for a long while. And I've been occasionally dipping into social media. I have not posted anything. I feel like, I feel like there's a lot that I want to say that's sort of, 40 years, 50 years worth of of things. And also, and it's scary to do this. And so I'm glad I have you. I sort of feel like this is the only format I could do it in. I was like, we need to do an episode because I don't, for reasons that we'll get into, I think that any soundbite version of this does harm in a way. Like anything I could say that would be like a snappy is harmful. And I'm hoping that the podcast episode won't be that harmful. Like that'll do more harm. Has the capability of doing more harm than good.
More good than harm.
More good than harm. Exactly. There's the risk of doing more harm than good, but hopefully not. And and I feel like I can only, my thoughts are such a jumble that it will be very, it's terrific that I get the chance to talk about it with you. It's like the only way that there's a chance that I will be able to put it together. So, and I will say, like preface-wise, that something I've sort of been, I've been having a lot of thoughts over the past week. I am in a lot of different spaces. I'm often in spaces where I'm like absolutely the most anti-Zionist person there, or in which I'm absolutely the most Zionist person there. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, whatever that means. But do you know what I mean? Like, I watched Hamas press conferences. I'm, watching. I'm talking to my Israeli friends. There's such a gulf, and it is really crucial to think about one's positionality. So I kind of want to say to podcast listeners, like, first of all, you might not want to listen to this episode. Like, if you are, directly affected by this, and this is true of lots of things we talk about, I'm just acutely aware of this one. But if you're directly affected by this, it might, it is, and to some extent, it's like, I think it is almost a danger as a writer to have an excess of empathy. Like, I am capable of putting myself into anybody's head. I'm really interested in how it would transpire that any given person would do any given thing. It is entirely possible that if, your relatives have bombs falling on them or your relatives have been kidnapped, that you it is not a good idea for you to hear the imaginative exercise of somebody being empathetic with people who have hurt you. So like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, there's a
and if, yeah,
was you know, this is part of why I guess I feel like I've been not commenting on this for a week and a half, in part because of that. Because you know, my tendency is to head towards an academic, you know, nuanced, complex discussion, and um, I sort of feel like is this the time for that, right? Like to, you know, have
yeah,
that kind of detached sort of discussion when people are in the midst of grief and
yeah,
and like crisis. The crisis is ongoing.
yeah,
So, um,
yeah.
but at the same time, I've been, you know, I've hesitated to say anything, and I think that I wanted to ask you about this. You know, we have various Jewish friends in common who are Ellen Kushner, who's a guest of the podcast. And I've been seeing some of them saying on their wall, you know, like Facebook wall, social media, the last few days, how how frustrating it is, how lonely it is to not be hearing expressions of sympathy, to not have people reaching out. And it's I have this sort of mental thing that I think is stupid, right? Where in my head, you know, I feel like they want me to say, I'm so sorry that babies are being killed. I'm so sorry that people are being kidnapped. And, you know, and my brain is going, well, that's obviously I'm horrified at that, you know, like, you know, how ridiculous for me to say it, right? Like, don't they know? And of
Mm,
course, the thing is I think what I'm coming to understand, you can check me on this, is that they don't know or they don't feel it. I mean, it's not really
yeah,
about what they know. In the moment, this is a very isolating moment for a lot of
yeah,
people.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so it matters. It matters even if it is obvious that killing babies is horrible. It's
It is.
yeah.
I mean, it's yeah, and it's not. See, yeah. I mean, whether killing babies are, you know, killing babies is horrible, but I think as Americans, I've been noticing this a lot in myself. As
Mhm,
a American man,
mhm,
I am predisposed to believe that the important thing is for me to have the correct opinion and to explain it to everyone. Like probably the next thing I have this impulse, the next thing I come up with will be the really smart thing that if everyone listens to it, it will solve everything, right? Or even if not, like what I think is really important. Like
mhm.
so, and even the way you're framing it, in a way, I'm not
Yeah,
to criticize because I think it's very real.
yeah,
And parenthetically, like yes, that is what this episode is for. If this episode can do any good, it is if you're in Marianne's position and you're wondering what the hell to do or think. I you know, this is obviously going to be full of all kinds of mistakes and may cause harm in various ways, but hopefully there is some path here to like how to think about um, what to do in that situation. So, like, the interesting thing is that I think that my saying the right thing is the important thing. Like that my
mm,
saying that if I say to somebody, "Hey, are you okay?" That the important thing is whether, like, do you know what I mean? Like that the denotative content, like the Marianne holds the proposition that killing babies is sad, like that's the important, like that the denotative content is the important part, right? And
yeah,
that as opposed to the expression of care and connection. And I will
yeah.
say, like, in terms of it being isolating and everything,
Mhm,
um, uh, in terms of it being isolating, like uh it isn't like I was talking about this with my sister, and it was like, well, the school hasn't issued any kind of statement, and people are like, should they? I don't know. Also, I was talking about this in context of a camp or whatever. Should they issue a statement? And she called up the school, and they were like, well, one, we have to get approval from the superintendent, but two, like, you realize the school is full of like Somali refugees. I mean, do you know what I mean? Like, this is all over the news.
right.
Nobody, like, I'm like, I have friends from, like, I don't know, like, did I call, like, when there was the last earthquake or whatever, did I go, you know what I mean? Like horrible tragedies happen all the time. So it isn't, I mean, yes, you should, it makes a difference for your friendships for you to reach out, even if they're not in the most publicized place in the world. But also, like, of course, people don't know people don't know horrible tragedies pass on your Facebook feed all the time. And you're like, oh yeah. And then you scroll on. So
I
like
think,
the reaching out to people is partly like,
yeah,
do you know what I mean? It's an interpersonal act, not an act of a declaration of a content.
I agree. I kind of want to tease out, though, a difference in type of tragedy, right? Because so when the tsunami hit Sri
Yeah.
Lanka, it was
Yes.
terrible, and people were very sympathetic. Sorry, we're probably gonna cry on this episode, so just brace for it.
Yeah.
So uh, it was terrible, but it was not fraught, right? And so
Yes.
some people
Yes.
expressed sympathy, some people weren't aware of it, some people aware of it but didn't realize expressing sympathy would be helpful, and that's all fine. In a political conflict, when the Tigers have used suicide bombers in Sri Lanka, that it becomes, no longer or when the Sinhalese government had penned up all of these civilians that the Tigers were that that they shot in order to get to the Tigers, it then becomes much more of a, it's not as simple as an expression of sympathy. People want to be able to say something helpful, and especially maybe the circles we run in that are kind of intellectual academic circles where lots of people have studied history and political conflict and so on and so forth. There's a kind of like, oh, I'm turning my attention to this, maybe I can fix things. And
yes, and that's exactly the impulse.
Someone posted on my wall yesterday when I said I posted something about, like, I've spent a couple hours reading about the Israel-Palestine history and I don't know how to fix the world. And she was like, why would you think that after 2 hours of reading you could fix something that has
know how to fix the world? Exactly.
Yeah.
And I do. So that is like one main takeaway here is like that what I noticed in myself is this it's like a dangerous lack of humility, and it's also a way of protecting oneself. Some people of our I don't know, cultural class position, whatever it is, like that's a go-to move. It's like, oh, what do I think about this? And it keeps at bay, keeps at bay what's happening. So I think it's important. So I want to say a couple of things as preparatory things. And then I think it's partly interesting. I think partly I just want to describe what the experience has been like. And then, kind of talk about this, what the difference is between being right about something and making a difference about it. So one prefatory thing I want to say is I think there's a couple of important concepts here. And one of them that I want to introduce this word into the discourse, which is isomorphism.
Okay.
Because I think that, so there was an attack by Hamas that was way bigger than anything they've achieved so far and was very intimate and brutal in the sense that people were shot and videotaped on their cell phones and the footage uploaded to their families and, kidnapped. And it was designed to provoke horror and fear. And then, predictably, Israel has responded with violence at a massive scale and has, just bombed a hospital. And there's some, there's thousands of Palestinians dead and under the rubble in this space that they can't leave. They can't leave to Egypt. Like there's 2 million people trapped inside a fence being bombed. And they, so, I mean, those are some facts. All of the facts are disputed. Like there's like so one of the interesting things about this is that there's all this there's like layers of propaganda, I mean, both I'm going to get to the term sides. The sides are not the sides you think they are, but both Hamas and the Israeli government are acutely aware that it's in many ways a psyops battle. Like that your Facebook page where you're all yelling at each other, that like in many ways one very important battleground. And so there's lots of disinformation. There was like a report that they'd beheaded 40 babies, and it turned out to be this settler kind of made that up, and it had been repeated by like Netanyahu and Biden and everybody before they had to walk it back, and we're like, we didn't never found 40 beheaded babies. But also Hamas's press conference, they were like, well, we avoided the targeting of civilians, and like, I'm pretty sure that. I mean, I know from people who I've talked to, who've actually, not via the media, that is not the case. Anyway, so I mean, well, I don't know what they targeted on purpose, but
and I think that's part of it's, there was this thing that somebody wrote up at one point in the earlier days of the internet, maybe a decade ago, that kind of went around, but like when news is breaking on this kind of crisis situation and you're seeing things online, pause, right? Like pause, because things that look plausible are in the very early days, early moments of a crisis, there is a lot of inaccuracy and deliberate misinformation going around, and wait for reputable sources. And it's very hard to do that when you're hearing about horrible things.
And also the framing. I mean, even reputable sources, like it's the difference between reading, Al Jazeera and reading, the New York Times or whatever, like, or whatever, different media. Like, there's a massively different
slant,
selective effect. Anyway, so so what I want to say about isomorphism is that often I think, like, it is really useful to think about how some experiences are similar and have the same pattern. It is useful to talk about, people getting murdered at a dance fair and people getting bombed under the rubble. And there is an objection to this that says, well, that's a false equivalent. Like, it's, and everybody on both sides says this, but like, but like, you're equating these two things. They're not the same. They're not equivalent. And it is an asymmetrical situation. Certainly it's asymmetrical in the sense that Israel has way more power to do damage than Hamas does. It's not a question. And it's also asymmetrical in certain aspects of the rhetoric about who claims they want to live in coexistence and who doesn't, or whatever, at different times in different ways. But it doesn't matter, because it is not like an anodyne namby-pamby thing to to look at it in terms of like people suffering, right? Like, and it is, and to say that if you have convinced yourself to relate to some category of person suffering with yes but, right? Like, if somebody says there are Palestinians lost in the rubble who are dying because they can't be found, or like Israelis were, murdered and then the videos sent to their parents, like, and your answer is going to be yes, but look at the broader context, like that, that there's a there's a really and that's so much what the social media landscape optimizes for. It wants you to pick teams, and it wants you to say smart shit that you think is smart. And it is, in any real human context, if you're not an asshole, you would read the room, right? You would not show up at somebody's funeral and say, yeah, they were kind of asking for it though, right? But it is impossible to read the room on the internet. And just saying, I feel bad for this person's loss, immediately provokes the response of like, oh, but, you know what I mean? Like, people are ready to, and that's this, and that is,
Well,
there's a bunch of like, yeah,
do you think it's so what you're saying reminds me of, in a different context, the kind of
yeah,
discussion about like the oppression Olympics, right? Of, you want to
yeah,
avoid that pattern of, my pain is worse than your pain. And it makes me wonder, and so your pain doesn't matter, right? Like you want to
yeah.
avoid the situation where you're trying to win at this because like there's no winning in,
But it's but it's more than that. It's more than
yeah.
my pain is worse than your pain, because you can measure and be like, there are more casualties in this region
Hmm.
than in that region. That's not the toxic thing. The
Hmm.
toxic thing, and I mean, the toxic. I remember in the we were pre-emailing about this, and you said something about like the pro-Palestinian, pro-Israeli sources. I think one of the amazing things we could do is to call into question pro-Palestine and pro-Israel.
Right.
Like, at the question, are you pro-Palestine or pro-Israel, which is the way that the debate is framed. Like there is this, let me just pause it. There's this hilarious video that we should link to in the show notes.
Okay.
Very funny skit from Funny or Die or something. I don't know, something like that, of an actor trying to decide whether they need to post, whether he should post in support of Israel or Palestine. It is funny because it's
Mm.
this satire, because he's so self-centered and it's all about his career, and he's just like, I don't get it, because we were for the Jews, right? But then, and usually I do what the queers want, and there's queers for Palestine. But then, just tell me which fucking flag to post. And it's like, and now I'm starting reading posts that say your silence noted. So he's on the phone with his manager, going like, we're running out of time here. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, which flag? It was easy with, and it's like, that is such a great satire, because that is the
Yeah.
mentality. It's like, which flag are you going to post? And what I really want to clarify is that the problem with saying these people lost 1,000, these people lost 200, 1,000 is more than 200, is not that it's not more. It's that the 1,200 people who died are on the same side.
Right. Right.
The sides are not actually the two. Like think about, if you have to have a reductive cartoonish image, instead of having a cartoonish image of a Palestinian and Israeli, have a kind of cartoonish image of a guy in a suit who wants power and a
Hmm.
grieving mother. Those are the sides.
Yeah.
So um and I think that's, and there are questions to which the correct answer is fuck that, right? If you
Hmm.
if you were to frame if somebody comes to you and tries to frame the struggle for racial justice in America as, are you pro-white or pro-black? You already know something about that person from the framing.
Hmm.
The answer to that framing is, holy shit, you want to start a race war.
Right.
Like, are you for racial justice is a question. Are you pro-white or pro-black? You already are. Like, if
Right.
you,
Yeah.
it's a genocidal question. Are you
Right.
pro-Israel or pro-Palestine is a genocidal question, because it's not, the thing about this war is that it isn't, there are wars that, even if they're insidious and toxic, and I don't want to, I kind of don't want to use any other example, because of course other wars are
Okay.
terribly, I don't think I should compare this with anything, but like, I don't know, let's say the American Revolution, that's far enough away. Like, are you a Tory or a patriot? There's a relatively clear end game, right? Like,
Hmm.
either the British are going to retain possession of the American colonies, or they will become an independent nation. Those are both like, right? Like, those are, yeah,
Hmm.
one happened in Canada, the other one happened in the States. We know those are both things that can happen. But the it is very understandable and relatable. When I said my empathy may be dangerous here, I understand the extremists, because I think if you are living next to these dangerous people who keep killing your relatives,
Hmm.
it is, and again, isomorphism, not equivalence, but it is such a natural thing to just wish that they would go away in the and most palatable way. Like,
Yeah.
those Jews, there's plenty of Jews in New York. They have plenty of relatives in Europe and America. They don't. Why are they slumming in the Middle East? They could just go. They'll find jobs. Or there's alternatively, there's 200 million Arab Arabs in the Arab world. Like, surely it's 2 million Palestinians. They could move to Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and there could be a program. They could get free healthcare and jobs and education and not be in this hellhole. Wouldn't that be nice? And so everybody has a wouldn't that be nice version of the other people giving up their land and leaving us alone and going away. And that's still like, that's a genocidal idea. And it is, and it's a fantasy. It doesn't ever, that's not how that happened, right? It's neither, like, they're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
But it's so understandable that you would want to be left alone. But it's so toxic. And so the idea of, like, now, I mean, there's some gloss. I mean, you could make the argument that when you say pro-Palestine, maybe you mean a unitary national state, non-ethnically related democratic state. And when you say pro-Israel, maybe you mean like a two-state solution with, like, independent Palestine. But that's not how it's being used, right?
And in fact, like, I think when I sent you that email, it was late. I was tired. I casually.
Oh, I'm not taking your task. That's what everybody says.
No. But I think it's interesting because, so your kind of framing is sort of that there are those of us who want to be advocating pro-peace, perhaps not to put words in your mouth, but the sort of the two sides you're seeing versus continued struggles for power and particular political parties being in power and particular individuals being in power.
Well, and let me,
but
go ahead.
But I guess what I was just to say, like, I had sent Ben last night some materials that my one of my departments had put together. So I'm a member of Global Asian Studies, and those materials were centered around Palestinians, and I should have said that, really, because one of the challenges right now is that there is, in some circles, there is very little information about Palestinians, what their cause is, what the issues are. And in America, there's often, a racist, racialized response to, and so they were trying to counter that, but it was not pro-Palestine as a government or a nation, or pro, and certainly not pro Hamas. It was pro accurate representation of Palestinians, right? So, but yes.
The thing I'm trying to get at, see, I think if I were to do a soundbite version of, like, everybody's grieving, right, support all the children, that sounds like be neutral, right? That sounds like this anodyne, like there's a danger of it being like, don't take a side. I am not saying be neutral. Being for peace does not mean being neutral. It's absolutely taking a side. The side is a just peace. The side is that the two. So in the 90s, when I was, spent 6 months in Israel, Palestine, and was observing what was going on, there was a strong peace movement. Like, in retrospect, it's easy to say, oh, it was all a sham set up by the Western governments, and it was just delaying, and it ended up just being a delaying tactic so Likud could build more settlements. But I don't think that was the only way it went, particularly because Northern Ireland got solved in the same time period. And I remember it not seeming more plausible that Northern Ireland would be solved. The main reason Northern Ireland got solved is because all the imperial powers aligned, because the people involved, because the UK basically wanted to join the EU more than they wanted to, so it was like nobody was. That still was very hard, the negotiation of getting the people to the table, and it's still unstable, and it's still like when Brexit happened, there was still the possibility it would pop off again. Like, it's not over, but like it did not. There was just as much hope. There was just as much hope, and the people who actively were trying to make peace were divided on a bunch of issues. Really, really, like they could not, there was still too much space between the proposals. They didn't know what to do about Jerusalem. They didn't know what to do about the law of return. They didn't know what to do about the refugees. They didn't know what to do about water. Like, even drawing the lines on a map, they got pretty close, but super contentious. They never got there. But on some level, compared to what other actors were doing, those are quibbles. Like essentially, the pro-peace side might have a quibble about like one state or two or three. I don't know. Like, how do we set this up? What do we get rid of the idea of, of nationhood altogether? Is it, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure that's it. There are, if you were to roll up your sleeves and be like, how do we make this work for everybody? There'd be lots to argue about collaboratively, right? But at the same time, those talks were actively sabotaged by the right-wing forces in Israel and by Hamas. And I, again, I am not demonizing anybody here. I understand. They are wrong. They are very, very wrong. But I understand why. And I understand why, Bibi Netanyahu stayed at my grandparents' house. Like, I come from Zionists, and I understand. And I understand that what Bibi Netanyahu comes out of is this Jabotinskian school, which was, and you got to look at this from the perspective, people always think about the Holocaust. I think the Holocaust is a misleading idea. By the time the Holocaust happened, everything was already, these ideologies were already pretty set. Nobody, like, the Jews didn't get massacred in 1944 and then go, oh, we need a state. The time to think about is like 1920, when two things happened. One is that the pogroms that I've been writing about that started in 1881 in the Russian Empire got to the fever pitch of being a mini Holocaust. Like, there were up to maybe 200,000, 250,000 Jews killed in the 1919 Ukrainian Civil War by everybody because they were suspected fifth columnists for everybody and nobody liked Jews. And at the same time, and this is also really crucial, America closed its doors. So when Zionism was just getting going in the 19th century and in the early part of the 20th century, it was like, yes, well, there's a romantic ideal of being like pioneers and building a socialist utopia or being like religiously close to the land or whatever. So like, maybe let's go to the Ottoman Empire and live with all the other people in the Ottoman Empire and do that. And maybe there'll be a state someday, if you will, it will happen. But most people just went to America. But in the 1920s, America closed its doors, and they kept them shut until after the Holocaust. Like, they turned back ships to go back to concentration camps. So at that point, that's when the Holy Land kind of became the only game in town. And that's when you see a massive uptick in immigration by the Jews to the Yeshuv, the old place. And there were two schools of thought among these Zionists. The left-wing Zionists, who I, to some extent identify with, were like, we have to figure out how to find an accommodation with the Arabs. Like, we're going to go live there. But frankly, these left-wing Zionists were kind of racist and naive because they were kind of like, we're bringing all this education, all this European like culture and education. We'll set up, we'll make the desert bloom and they'll thank us for it. They'll be happy to live with us as our happy neighbors and, we'll divide things up. It wasn't that naive in the beginning because actually during the Ottoman times, the Arabs and Jews got along great, mostly. But as it became clear that this was a huge surge and really going to displace people, there started to be more and more tensions. So by the 1920s, there was like beginning to be civil war. But the Jabotinskians were like, the Jabotinskians in some way you could argue had a more sort of open-eyed view of less patronizing view. They were like, it's their land, they don't want us there, they're going to fight. The only way we're going to be there is to fight forever. So there's a way in which the Jabotinskians, the Likud, the Israeli right wing, they don't have an end game. They actually fetishize, in some sense, not having a head game, because my entire childhood, what I heard was the Jews only survive, or Israel only survives, through a continuing series of miracles. It's kind of like, what a lovely koan. But what it basically means is our. It sounds very poetic, but like our baseline here is like, if we just don't die, that's enough. And so for the Likud, for the right wingers, when the peace process was happening, their attitude was, this is a sucker's game. They're never going to like us here. They always will want us to leave. This is an eternal war. So if we give up any land, we're just suckering ourselves. So they intentionally sabotaged the peace process. And the same thing on the Palestinian side. Hamas is like, no, thank you. We do not want a like little chunk of a secular state in this land. It's all ours. And also, Hamas is a Hamas wants to it wants a theocracy. I mean, a lot of the Israeli right also wants a theocracy. They, again, isomorphism, very similar. They want a theocracy in which it's not, Hamas. It's not unreasonable to say that Hamas wants to kill Jews, regardless of whether they're Israelis or whatever. But I would say that's tactical. I think if the Jews like settle down like good dhimmi and become second-class citizens in a new caliphate, Hamas is fine with it. They're not Nazis. They don't want to kill every last Jew. They just want to kill the Jews till they give up and give and let there be like the caliphate. So. And again, I am not an expert about this, so I don't know. It's possible that I'm talking about my ass, particularly about Hamas. I know more about the genesis of Likud. But what I'm trying to say is there were people who were like, should we draw the line here or should we draw the line there? Should we handle Jerusalem like this or should we handle Jerusalem like this? They disagreed. They were two sides of a negotiating table, but they were trying not to be enemies. And both Hamas and Likud, for reasons that I think they felt like this is a fantasy, you guys are building this pie in the sky thing. And so the thing I want to point to is the symbiosis. It's not that I'm saying just sort of conceptually or like theoretically, like Netanyahu actually funded Hamas. Like that's not a conspiracy theory. He was worried about the PLO becoming too strong and advancing peace negotiations. And he was like, this is an important counterbalancing force. Like that's again, I don't have, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding. And in fact, when this started, so I should probably say the experience part because I'm gotten into philosophizing. So I was at Simchat Torah.
Yeah. I was going to ask you how you feel, but but go with.
Well, let me tell the story a little bit. Let me tell the story a little bit. So I was at. I mean, I could spend the whole podcast crying, but a balance should be struck.
It's not necessarily a terrible response, but
Simchat Torah. I was at Simchat Torah. That's the one where we read the whole. We finish reading the Torah, we start again. It's supposed to be very joyous. I got there a little late, so I think everybody had been looking at the news and knowing what was happening, and they were kind of frozen and going through the pages. I only really, but I heard somebody said something like there was an attack by Hamas, and I was like, initially I was like, oh shit, here we go again, because I'm figuring they launched some rockets. Now Israel's going to bomb the hell out of Gaza, and once again we'll have this hateful news cycle and whatever. Of course, this is of a totally different scale. Like, this is a totally different scale. There were like, thousands of Israelis killed and wounded and kidnapped and whatever. And we know people. I mean, you can't not. It's a very small country. It's like 6 9/11s, but that understates it from Israel's population. But that vastly understates it because people in Iowa don't necessarily know people in New York. It's like everybody nobody, right? Doesn't actually, like, everybody, there's like, I specifically know of relatives of people I'm close to who are in Gaza, not necessarily being treated well. And when the scale of it became clear, I had 4 fears or reactions or feelings. And this, so I was like, first of all, it's so horrific. It's so horrific. And it's so terrifying and sad. And that is like for the Israelis who were just, out at a rave to be murdered and abducted. And then also, I think my second thought was probably, oh shit, because Israel typically responds disproportionately. Like, it's almost a logic. There are going to be more Palestinian casualties than And so I was like, even, not more, there's no more, but I was like, that's horrific. And also what's coming is horrific. And also I am in danger. Like there's all this, increased security at the synagogue and whatever. And like my kids, I don't know, like they meet new people. Like there are people in Europe who want to kill me now more. I mean, there always were, but you know what I mean? Like that's certainly I read what Hamas said about it because there was all this, everyone's like, Friday's the day of kill the Jews. Hamas wants to kill the Jews. I read what Hamas said. If we're going to apply the standards that we do in America about dog whistling, fair enough. Hamas was like, because of the glorious thing that our brothers and sisters did and their glorious victory, this is a day of direct action in which everyone should take to the streets all over the world and, honor them and make a difference, which you could read as like, oh, you should probably do nonviolent protests. But, I'm your honor, maybe not. And also, there's going to be this massive wave of Islamophobia. Like all four things go together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's the same. That's and I know that every Arab or Muslim or Palestinian person who heard the news felt the same way. Oh shit, that's so terrible what happened, and now it's coming for us, and it's coming for them, and it's the same. That is. That's part of it. Like that's it's wrapped up together. It is which makes it palpable in those moments that we are on the same side, because there is no it sounds very kumbaya, but it's like literally a hard, cold fact that there is no way that any of us are safe unless all of us are safe. There's not like a anodyne. It's like Likud's plan fucking sucks.
Mm-hmm.
War forever fucking sucks. I refuse. So there is not, it's like, I don't know. And so, and the thing that's the most chilling, like I, in these moments, really relate to Arabs and Muslims and Palestinians. I feel really connected to them. What's really chilling is all the goyim, all the Arabs and Europeans and Christians taking sides like it's a soccer match, and often in a heartfelt way, they're trying to do the right thing, right? I even empathize with the actor in the video who's like, which flag do I post? I mean, but like, it's like the thing I want to tell everybody who's like, which flag do I post? Or who's sure. The thing I want to tell everybody who reacted to the news of anything, the news of the possible getting bombed in Gaza, the news of the Israelis that got murdered in their houses, with this is another bolstering argument for the thing I think already, right? Like, well, this just illustrates how, insert your supposedly right-wing or left-wing opinion here, is that if you respond to that by rushing to say I stand with Israel or I stand with Palestine, if your answer is free Palestine, that's the whole story, settler colonialism, that's what happens. Or if your answer is I stand with Israel, murderous terrorist barbarians, show them what's what. If that's your answer, that is what you are. Not only are you doing what Hamas and the Jabotinskians want you to do, you're specifically doing what the opposite of what you think you're doing. So when you say, like, Hamas made the attack as brutal as possible to provoke, like, let's put it this way. Think about their actual goals. Hamas, it's useful for them to have prisoners. They can bargain the prisoners for a lot of like their prisoners released and this and that and whatever. But they know it's not going to end the embargo. And they know they're not going to conquer Israel. They didn't come out to like take territory. It's not the kind of war where you come out and like take the territory and they're like, we can hold a lot. That was never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So why? Because Hamas's end game is it's a long struggle. They're going to have to wait it out as long as Israel has America's backing. So they need to basically wait for the American empire to fall and see if they get a better deal from the Chinese or whatever. Like, or maybe the caliphate will rise. Like, it's a long game. And so what do they need to do? They need to stand tough, which means they need no moves toward peace. Israel was, talking in peace talks with Saudi Arabia is one of the major like immediate triggers, but no moves toward peace and solidarity within. Like if people start getting pissed off at Hamas and are like, why are we listening to these guys with guns? If Israel bombs the fuck out of everyone, that ends that discussion.
Right.
And the same thing. So when you post like, I stand with Israel, aircraft carriers, like, I'm not saying nobody can say I stand with Israel. I'm saying with Palestine, because of course that's partly just a heartfelt expression. I get it, and of course you want to support your friends. But when it gets filtered through social media into this, like, this side, these are the good guys. When you are like, Israel has a right to defend itself, crush the Hamas is psyched. They check a box. They're like, that's what I wanted. Now they show that to the Palestinians, and they're like, look, I'm your only hope. And the same thing, if you think that when Netanyahu bombs Gaza, if you're like, Israel is a settler colonialist state and the only solution is whatever, like it's a simple matter, free Palestine and Israel. Netanyahu's team high fives. They high five. They see that post and they're like, sweet, because that says to all the Israelis, like, well, you're fucked. Like, there's nobody else. We're the only ones. That's like mana for the Jabotinskian agenda, right?
So I think
is what I'm saying. Making sense.
Yeah, it is. I'm trying to tell me whether this soundbite. I don't want to get things wrong, right? So if I were going to translate some of that into a soundbite, I think I would say, for people like me who are not, super educated on the topic, not directly affected by the topic, perhaps, that a thing to remember is that factionalism tends to feed the violence. Is that fair?
I think setting the terms as pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian is like that does not mean you can't. I'm not saying be neutral. I'm not saying don't have an opinion. You can be for a unitary state. You can be like, I don't like the idea of an ethno state. I think it should be a unitary democratic communist state in the Holy Land, and we shouldn't call it Israel more. That's fine. You have an opinion about it. That's just your bullshit opinion, by the way. What actually has happened is that people on the ground talk to each other and figure out some solution. Like, your white paper that you published on your political theory about how it could happen in the year 2150 is fine, but that doesn't do anything necessarily. Right. I mean, maybe they'll look up the white paper, but, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's not, people think that's way more efficacious to have a theory of what's going to happen. But even that is fine. It's the this is the good, this is the right team. It's the implicit genocide of, like, the other guys will just go away. The fantasy that the Palestinians are going to knuckle under forever and submit to Israeli rule, or that they're going to leave, is a genocidal fantasy. And the fantasy that the Israelis are just going to disappear and, like, go, wherever Jews go, it's not important. They're rich. They'll go somewhere. And, like, it'll be Palestine, like, is also, I mean, I don't know, maybe there'll be a unitary state and it'll be named Palestine, but, like, if there isn't, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of those Jews are not like New Yorkers who wanted by to get a summer condo in. That's like, they came from Morocco and Yemen, and you know what I mean? Like, those are Middle East. Those are, what we have is two ethnic groups which were scattered about Europe in part, but largely the Ottoman Empire, and nobody was a nation yet. Like, people are like, well, the Palestinians, that's not a real nation, or like, it's a made up. That's true of Italians too. Like, Palestinian and Israeli nationhood is a project that happened historically at the same time as German and Italian nationhood in the 19th century, because before that it was like, this is my little local clan, and there's a sultan somewhere, and then, like, they became nations along the model of Poland and all the Greece, like, that's nationalism, and now we have them. They're not going anywhere. Neither of them is going anywhere. All right. Well, you wanted a soundbite. I guess nobody's going anywhere. The sides are pro-peace or pro-genocide. Those are the sides. And the other soundbite is, just listen. Go. It's like, it's fine if you have your little theory, But like what you really are called to do is to go listen to your Jewish and Arab, Muslim and Muslim friends and your Israeli and Palestinian friends and like, or neighbors or whatever. Just try and like be there for the people. It doesn't, you know what I mean? It's like everybody is suddenly an expert in politics who wants to advise, the PLO and the Knesset. What? Nobody,
Yeah.
like, honestly, nobody fucking cares what you think.
Right.
And I'm saying that to me too. Like my impulse is also to be like, well, as you can hear on this podcast, my impulse is to like give you 1,000. Nobody fucking cares. Just because there is and I think that's the thing to interrogate is how easy it is for you listening to it as a relatively uninvolved person if there's a simple narrative, if you can be like, which again, not saying like be neutral and everybody's equal. No, it's really hard and tough, and there could be tough decisions, and there's a thing like working for peace will require making these solving these really interesting conundrums. But like the ease of being like, oh, I'm pro-Palestine or I'm pro-Israel, like is sheltering you from the feelings. The purpose of your just being like, I'm pro this side, is that you don't have to feel what is happening. That is, I think, the thing to interrogate, and it's the peace movement is in retreat. It feels like it barely exists because the extremists were so effective at the end of the 90s and in this century at destabilizing it. Like the recipe. Well, the thing I want to say about the symbiosis, by the way, let me back up a minute because I do want to say this about the symbiosis between the and I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I'm not saying that Netanyahu and the Hamas call each other up. They don't. I'm not saying that. But the last Gaza war started because at a time when there was some political instability and Netanyahu was threatened, there was a massive, humiliating, symbolic invasion of the Temple Mount, right? Like people like the Dome of the Rock, third holiest shrine in Islam, is usually reserved for that part. There's the Western Wall where the Jews are, and then the Dome of the Rock is the Muslim part. And like a lot of like, Jews went and hooliganed around up there, and that triggered the war. And when this happened, and somebody says this happened in Gaza, I was like, oh, of course it fucking did. After 6 months of massive protests in Israel against Netanyahu's government, because Netanyahu is in the same illiberal camp as Trump and Erdogan and Modi, and he's trying to remove a lot of sort of the basic institutions of checks and balances in Israeli government. And so there's a massive protests against it. And they're not exactly pro-peace protests. They're a very broad swath of Israeli society, including a lot of the right. But a lot of people's problem is that, in fact, if you look at the details of what the Supreme Court has been striking down that Netanyahu doesn't like and why he wants to nerf the Supreme Court, it's because they won't let him do whatever he wants in the territories. Like that's the last line of defense of any kind of attempt at civil rights, and that's what he's trying to nerf. So that they're not pro-peace protests, but they're not unrelated. And they're really they're huge. Like this is like, again, proportionately, if you were like half of Israel's on the street, like there were massive protests, and it really looked like he might lose power. And he's under investigation for corruption, so if he loses power, he might go to jail. You know what I mean? Like that. This is very Berlusconi, very Trump, right? And so I was like, of course, I bet you there was a provocation. So I Googled, and yes, 3 days before the Al-Aqsa flood, a bunch of settlers flooded Al-Aqsa. Like there was a massive outbreak of settlers, like ran around, and they had to police, I don't know, shut up all the Palestinians in their houses so that because the settlers are going to go rampage, and they were going to do, and I love this part, by which I mean I don't love this part, heavy scare quotes, Talmudic rituals on the Temple Mount. That is not a thing. You're like self-caricaturing. Right. That's like you're like, right. Oh my God. Anyway, so they're basically like, we're going to build the third temple, and I cannot prove, but I suspect this is the only conspiracy theory part, I suspect that was green lighted from on high because Netanyahu wants the pressure off. Now, Netanyahu got way more than he bargained for because he was expecting that he would humiliate Islam by sending these people to the Dome of the Rock, and then Hamas would feel under pressure to fire a few rockets, and then he could fire even more rockets, and he'd be like, at war, rally around the flag, no time for your silly protests. That was his plan. Now, the only reason that it didn't work out that way is because in the meantime, Hamas had figured out how to hack the fence. So they got out. And so we have a whole other different ballgame, and I have no idea what's going to happen, and it was a mess. And mass murder, followed by more mass murder, all the ordinary people getting murdered as usual. But my point that I'm trying to make is about the symbiosis. Like that for the forces that say this is eternal war, we do not want peace because peace is a pipe dream anyway. That's what they want. That's why would you say he wanted Hamas to? I'm not saying he wanted Hamas to attack like this. I'm not saying he wanted to lose, but he wanted to provoke in order to distract. It's a wag the dog thing. I don't think I'm out in La La Land suggesting this. It's like a pattern every time.
Well, I mean, I think this is a general political pattern, right? I mean, this is reminding me of, all my episodes of watching West Wing, right? Of, the Democrats and the Republicans saying, well, we don't want moderates because then we won't win the next election. We want our opposition to be rabid and, because then we can whip up our side and our side can win, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's just, I think, a part of political maneuvering and something that we all need to be more aware of. This is like, we can't have universal health care in America because, if part of the reason we can't have it is because Democrats want the issue for the next election, that fucking sucks, right? I mean, that causes so much human misery. And, and it's because it is, I can see how we get there. You get there by thinking, well, my side is the good side. We're trying to do these good things. And the worst thing would be if the other side got into power, right? And as soon as you accept that proposition, it makes a lot of things justifiable, easy to convince yourself you've got to, because the alternative would be worse, right? And so once you have that in your head, it's, I think, hard to de-escalate from. I don't know how you de-escalate from that position.
And I think that generally the idea of justifiable because the alternative would be worse is that's a lot of I don't know, but and anyway, I just want to say that I'm not an expert about this, but there are still you do not see much of a the official peace process has been a farce in this century mostly, but that does not mean there are not grassroots. There are there's a very potent group of bereaved Palestinian and Israeli parents who've lost and lost children is one of the major, and who have been, I don't know, it's, and those things are so fragile, and the attempt to figure out and the people in them, by the way, are super far apart. It's not like there's a peace plan on the table that everybody's like, oh, these extremists keep messing it up. People who want to make a deal are so far apart on what they think a deal would be. But also those things are so fragile and so easy to destroy. It's so easy for somebody who's the worst thing that would happen would be a deal. It's so easy for them to squash.
Yeah, I guess I agree. Yeah, I think it's true. I think the peace process gets derailed really friggin' fast. I guess I would also say that, I mean, I'm not a historian. I'm not a political scientist. I've studied some of this in context of Sri Lanka, right, in my own work, and teaching post-colonial lit. And I think one danger, I guess, is giving up hope, right?
Yeah.
You start feeling like it's easy to start feeling like this is intractable. It cannot be solved. And then you stop trying. And historically, things change. Things change on a dime, and often from a direction you didn't expect. And, you were thought here's, we need to solve A, B, C, and X, Y, Z, and it's actually M showing up out of nowhere that makes the difference, and
Yeah.
and causes change. And so,
Yeah, and I think to some extent
um,
the despair is smoke and mirrors. The despair is part of
yeah,
the psyops. The sense
yeah,
that there can't. That's literally the whole thing that the one side is advancing is there is no hope of
right,
peace. Like this is an eternal war. That is literally eternal war
yeah,
until they all decide to go away or
hmm,
die, and that is, that's like so. Yeah, despair is like, you know what I mean. Like, and but yeah, anyway, and there's, the desire for peace is really resilient. Like
hmm,
nobody thinks this is good. Anyway, I don't know, but I also don't want to be like, I mean, really, I want to return to the thing about humility. Like, honestly, I want to like I am not. I feel like before this round of the conflict, I was like, um, you know, I can sympathize with everybody who desires peace, and I feel like, the other guys are wrong. So I'm still playing like those guys are wrong. It's just a
hmm,
different set of guys. But I'm also like just so much like I I just understand
hmm,
how somebody whose kid is buried under rubble, like it's a lot to ask to be
yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Or like
I
a
look at
lot of the
the,
Israeli reaction was
mhm,
like, oh, I think a lot of people, I mean, like, frankly, I hope that part of the takeaway is Netanyahu really fucked this up, and that there might be an opening from the fact that this was so disastrous. But I also
mhm,
think that a lot of people are like, we were told that they just wanted to murder us in cold blood, and that they, hated us and they would do anything to kill us. And we were like, you're exaggerating but like, sure looks like it. Like, it's sure not a big incentive to take down the wall if you get over the wall for a minute. And this is you know what I mean? And I'm not saying that isn't actually reflective. You know what I mean? That's the that's what the that's what the eternal war side wants you to think, and that's how it's hyped up, and people are bamboozled, manipulated into that. But you can understand how, or you can understand, and the guys who also, the 1,000 fighters who went and murdered people in Israel, had all could not possibly all not but have lost so many family members to the Israeli. But do you know what I mean? It's like I I do not have any trouble
yeah.
understanding why people lose hope, and I mean, I'm not saying that I understand it like I would drop the bomb or shoot somebody, but I just think it is, I think it's like it's a wild exercise. It's like how we say, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. It's a
Hmm.
wild imaginative exercise to think what restorative justice looks like
And I think
in this
so I,
situation, but it's necessary.
it's necessary. I have two thoughts. One is, um, one, I want to point people to the Dairy Girls finale, which covers the Good Friday Agreement,
Yeah.
because I thought they did a really good job of portraying the complexities of how people are feeling, even in that moment where, peace has come at last, and yet, there's so much grief and trauma. Um, and I guess my other thought is just,
You know what I want? I want them to watch the Dairy Girls canal. I want all the again, for the people who are directly
yeah,
affected, for
yeah,
some crazy reason you're still, that's ableist. For some odd reason you're still listening to this podcast episode. Like, I would like to shut up and listen to you ignore everything I said. Also, if for the people who are like, which flag should I post, and are looking to this episode for guidance, like, watch the Dairy Girls finale and imagine how that would have gone. I haven't watched it yet, no spoilers. Imagine how that would have gone had they had Facebook and the entire world was posting like
yeah,
shamrocks and orange. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like pro Irish and pro, like the entire world and piling on with like which side. Like, would that
Right.
delicate arrangement have worked out differently?
So, So 3 things I wanted to say. So that was one. The second is, just to speak to what you were talking about just now, is I someone hurt my kid freshman year 2 years ago, and and it made me we try not to use crazy or insane in an ableist way, but I would say I was not rational,
Mhm,
I could
mhm.
not. There was a while where I could not think straight in response to this, and I still
Yeah,
can't. I still can't really. I try and like
yeah,
when we're she's thinking about writing about it for one of her college essays, and like the fear just kind of like rushes up again, and like, is this going to re-traumatize her, and so on, right? So,
yeah.
like, it's asking parents to be like good citizens working towards peace when they've been through having their kids killed. There was a Palestinian American child killed a few days ago in Chicago, a 6-year-old, in a anti-Muslim attack by his landlord, and it stabbed 29 times. And like,
Yeah.
how do you ask his family to like come back to a peace process? I have no idea, right? Like
And
that
yet it's extraordinary that so many people like that there
yeah,
are people
yeah.
in that situation. Like that is actually the engine of
That is
what's
a
left, which is
right.
far more solid. That is a far more solid engine of a peace process than handshakes on the White House lawn. The engine that's
Yeah,
left is the people who have lost
yeah,
their kids
yeah,
and are reaching out to each other, because that is another reaction you could have. But it is not. But yeah, it's a lot.
yeah.
It's a lot to ask. I mean, you cannot ask that of anyone. I don't know. Um,
No, okay, wait, and let me just say
yeah,
my third thing
sure,
is I have a whole list of topics that I would love to talk to you about, and
sure.
we're not going to, right? I have all these
Okay.
questions and things that I want
Well,
to
I don't know.
discuss.
We could.
No, 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 no. Like well, not today. We're not going to talk
Okay,
about it today because each one
fair enough.
is a 2-hour episode in and of itself. So I'll keep the list and we may come back to it.
Okay.
Um,
Well, I don't
so
wouldn't mind some. I mean, we could touch on. Maybe we could do the short version.
well,
All
no, no,
right, go
no,
ahead.
no, no.
Go ahead. You've got another plan. Go ahead.
I do. Here, how about this? I'll list off some of the topics.
Yeah.
I want to talk about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. I want to talk about, is it just ever justifiable to turn to violence? I want to talk about how do we get away from attacking civilians when, is that distinction meaningful when both governments and non-governmental forces are, see how effective it is to attack civilians? What's our responsibility right now in terms of trying to fix the world? But so there's a whole set of things, but we're probably going to talk for
I
maybe
mean,
another
can I
half.
give short answers? So one short answer is justifiable is a weird word, because in a way it's like, um, I mean, I don't know. I don't. To whom? Like, to some extent, what I'm not making an argument that people don't have a right to self-determination, that there's not a right to have, whatever. Like sure, I have plenty of ways that I can justify lots of like, sure, I can understand that's a reasonable reaction to the last thing that happened, right? But the question is actually, where is it getting you? What is the road you are on, and where are you, and where is it taking you? You know what I mean? Like that, it isn't that, um uh it's almost like, again, it's not like a namby-pamby kumbaya, like,
Yeah.
flower child thing. It's like who won? Mandela won. And he didn't start out nonviolent. Mandela was in, like, they're blowing stuff up. But Mandela picked the moment to be like, I'm gonna appear on stage with my jailers. I'm gonna have a rugby game for the white South Africans. I'm gonna knit this thing together. Like, I'm gonna make these enemies not enemies. Like that is the that, and because he knew that's how you win. You don't
Mhm.
win by getting rid of your enemy. That's not a thing. You win by having them not be your enemy. You know what I mean? Like, that's that. Now, I'm not saying, I don't know, the history of South Africa after that is long and complicated, and I'm not sure it all worked out in the end. But like, it's not that, all the people making peace are killers. Like, Rabin and Arafat, who were this close. They killed Rabin because he was going to make peace. Yitzhak Rabin, the prime minister of Israel.
Right.
He was a soldier. He'd kill, you know what I mean? He was, he'd ordered attacks on, I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that, I don't know, and Arafat too. I mean, you have to make peace with your actual enemy. You don't get to make peace with like some night. You get to make peace with, I'm going to ignore the guy who I'm fighting with and go make peace with, I don't know, some nice guy down the block, right? But like, that's the thing about, I mean, it's like, I mean, on some level, no violence is ever justifiable. And on the other level, like, what? Justifiable to whom? Sometimes people, you know what I mean? Like, I'd rather look through a lens of like restorative justice. Like, these things have happened. Why did they happen? How do we fix that? How do we make this okay for everybody?
So I understand. And
anyway,
I think this is what I think that's I think it's a bigger topic, because I think part of the things I want to talk about are, the way the Palestinians are being cast in sort of discourse around this, and
which is horrific.
And the kind of, and the way in which people are not aware of the kind of oppression that they've been living under. I was reading one thing that was saying, now I'm going to forget the name of the spice. There's like the spice that za'atar, right? I was reading one thing that was talking about how they're not allowed to gather the wild herb za'atar because it's seen as a pro-Palestinian act, because it's part of the cuisine. And right. I'm like, okay, we are now in like completely surreal land where that has become seen as propaganda and so on. So anyway, I just think that's a huge,
and particularly topic. And I actually think that's worth pointing out, because I've been talking a lot about bombs, but that is not the only thing that's happening to Gaza. Gaza has been under siege for 15 years. There was a period where they were like restricting how many calories went into Gaza to make sure that everybody stayed just above malnutrition. I mean, it's, Gaza is and like so I think
that's why, I mean, I think it would be, I think it's a topic for a bigger episode. I kind of want to talk about like Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, and like what happens especially when you have a disproportionate power situation where one group may have overwhelming, and I don't even necessarily need to have this conversation around Israel and Palestine. Like, it might be better to have a more broad-ranging conversation.
Another thing another point I wanted to bring up that I didn't get to, that comes to mind, is that is this, because I think one thing that I think is a very interesting asymmetry that I keep wrestling with. So there's all this conversation about like settler colonialism and apartheid and whatever. And the thing about that is that, like, from the perspective of the Palestinians in the territories, definitely a lot like apartheid, like Bantustans. Right. I mean, like, there's no functional difference really.
Right.
I mean, there's a slight difference in the sense that within the Green Line, Arab Israelis are in parliament and whatever, and that didn't exactly happen. And but I mean, you could make it various whatever. But like but of course, nobody was trying to kill the Boers, right? It's not like the Boers showed up in South Africa because the world was like this, or we kill you.
Right.
So it's like, but should do the Palestinians have an obligation to care about that? I don't know. I mean, it might be useful for them to know, but like, if somebody's, do you know what I mean? Like, so it is the funny thing is that the word settler colonialist applies to Israel. My problem is actually not with colonialist, it's with settler. Like, so the thing about it is that there is a sense in which the occupied territories have a pint-sized colonial relationship to Israel, right? It controls them, it extracts value from them. I mean, a lot of the engine. I mean, there's an exploitative relationship, and the brutality is not dissimilar to colonialism. If the Palestinians, like, they definitely was not better. It definitely was not worse out of the British, right? Like, if they and so this very understandable feeling of like, well, everybody else got rid of colonialism, we're still here. The settler part, though, is this fantasy that the Jews showed up from somewhere else they could easily go back to, right? Like, the Boers weren't ever like,
well, and we had
murdered,
this,
and then
we had this during the Sri Lankan conflict, right?
Yes.
That, like, a lot of the Sinhalese, which was the majority group, said there aren't Sinhalese anywhere else. We're only in Sri Lanka. the Tamils, there's
They could go back.
India's right there. They could go back.
Right,
Yes, it was
right.
2,000 years ago
It
that
was
they
2,000
left.
years ago, but what's that? Right,
Right,
exactly.
right.
So the although we were here firstism is this very
Yeah,
toxic by everybody. Is this very,
yeah.
and that's the mirror image again. Isomorphism. It's the mirror image of this thing I grew up with. Although the Palestinians aren't really a people, that's like just cooked up together out of. It's like
Mhm.
what they're being
Yeah,
a people. Like there
right,
wasn't nationalism in the European sense, but like
right,
what you have. These are two local ethnic groups of the Ottoman Empire that
right.
got turned into nationalism, and a bunch of their relatives showed up in both cases. I mean, a lot of people came to Palestine from. There's a lot of immigration. There wasn't very many people in 1700. There just weren't very many people in the Holy Land, Arab or Jewish. And then a lot of people came, like people who were there and their relatives, and there was a process of nation building. But like, it's not like, yeah, and I think when non-Arab, non-Jewish people on Facebook, again, I feel like this idea that it's settler colonialism as opposed to what is a very common pattern, which is that
Mhm,
there are two ethnic groups and one of them is a client of empire, right? Like the
mhm,
French were fans of the Hutu. The Hutu were
mhm,
on top. That's my very simplistic understanding of
mhm.
Rwanda, is that the French backed the Hutus, so the Tutsi, and then after the French left, the Tutsi took over and came. So it's like there's these two groups, and like one, it's not symmetrical. One of them's
Yeah,
backed by empire.
yeah.
That's the classic imperial strategy. The empire comes in and like backs the
Divide and conquer, right?
divide and conquer. We're
Yeah.
picking this group, and they're the picking the group. That's actually a really important point. The picking the group
Mhm.
is part of colonialism. That's
Right.
how it's like coming in and being like, these are our guys. That's how
Mhm.
you destabilize the whole. So like Palestinians and Jews, or Palestinians and, yeah, Muslims and Jews and Christians, Palestinians and
Mhm.
Jews, whatever, are natural allies. People who are together in the Ottoman Empire got along great under the Turks, and
Mhm.
like in the old Yishuv, and like, I mean, not always great. There were outbreaks of whatever. It's not like there wasn't any anti-Semitism in the Muslim world, whatever. But like the colonial thing is to turn them into two things, one of which is like a militarized puppet state for empire, and the other of which is like even more subaltern. And it's kind of a consolatory fantasy, like the settler part, the idea that they're settlers, that you could be like, this is
Mhm.
first, Palestinians are indigenous, the Jews are settlers. That's nonsense. They are both
Yeah.
indigenous. And it's kind of like you don't want to deal with, it's kind of like not like a sheltering you from the messiness um, of like, it's this thirst to have, um I don't even want to say good guys and bad guys, because it's not like, again, it's not that I'm trying to make an equivalence. It's not like you can't be like, this is, as you were saying, like kick together Zatar. Like you can't, it's not that you can't say this is an oppressive uh structure that these people are under. This is but it's like, but it's sort of an erasure to be like, they just showed up. It's kind
Mhm.
of, again, it's isomorphic with the fact that I grew up with this narrative of like, well, the Arabs hate the Jews because they're anti-Semitic, and I was like, really, it's because they're anti-Semitic. They're in camps. You think they're so like selfless and altruistic? They're like, well, of course, I've been put in a camp, but it's not because of that I hate the Jews. It's a general principle. Like I'm so philosophical. You could move me to a mansion and give me full civil rights. I would hate the Jews just as much. It's a philosophical commitment. Do you know what I mean? Like that's not like,
Mhm.
similarly, the idea that the Jews just showed up and were like, I don't know, how about here? Like, anyway, I don't know. So, yeah, like,
So
I
my
guess I just want everybody to not be smart about it and just
Mhm.
let their heart break
So I kind of
for a
wanted
while and
that was
listen.
my so that was my
Listen
third
to the
point,
people.
which I'm determined to get to. So
Okay,
I'm
go to your
gonna,
third point.
my third point is that we
This
have,
podcast has no structure.
maybe 15 minutes left. No, it's gonna
Okay.
have a structure, and I'm
All
gonna
right.
at least attempt to get you
15 minutes left.
to stop intellectualizing. And I want to like
Oh.
go into therapy mode. And my third point was I wanted to ask you how you feel, and I want to. What is it that my therapist says? Empathize. Something and assert. I can't. Oh, she's a three-word phrase, and I forget what the middle thing is. But I'm not very good at it. But I'd like to practice. being a
Sounds
good
good.
friend to somebody going through trauma. So, and I'm worried about my friend, and I want to hear how it's been for you. And, you know,
Yeah, well. So I'm just supposed to cry for 15 minutes? Is that the plan for the rest of the podcast?
it's fine. Crying. She says crying is good. So,
I mean,
you
it's
know,
definitely good. I'm just not sure it makes
yeah,
it makes for good podcast. Uh,
it's okay. We can,
yeah,
we
I don't
can,
know. It's
Darius can
yeah,
edit
I
it.
guess. Um, well, it's I don't know. I mean, it's I don't know. It's funny that yes, the whole thing about under what circumstances I can access my feelings is also funny. Like in some ways, it's interesting. I think this is generally true that it's often more like hopeful things that make me cry
Mhm.
than you know what I mean. Like the devastation is so great that it's just numbing. Like the
Mhm.
devastation of the fear and the guilt, not really guilt, but yeah, I mean like the guilt by association and
Do you
fear and you know what's that?
do you feel you said guilt by association, do you feel
I don't know, like the
responsible?
outrage that things are being done in your name.
Yeah, yeah.
Which
Well,
again, I think everybody is actually, it's like the yeah,
I mean,
you know,
there's even some of that a tiny bit for me as an American, right? Every time America makes a move in this, and I'm like,
sure.
I don't know that I support what you're doing, and but
Well, yeah,
you're
I mean, I mean that, yeah, I mean,
yeah,
sure. I mean, it's not like
yeah,
Americans are
yeah.
less. I mean, in some sense, this is all yeah, like I said, when the imperial powers want conflicts to end, it's a lot easier to end them. There's actually
Mhm.
not the difference, but the only different. There was not a different level of like deep-seated animosity in Northern Ireland. The difference was that the imperial powers in question were all on the same page. So it's not like this isn't in America's, you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
I can both simultaneously believe that many American like presidents and secretaries of state have sincerely wished that maybe their smart idea would end the Middle East peace crisis, and also believe that America is in some sense the problem. Like it, is in
Mhm.
some sense, you know, uh, uh, it's convenient to keep Israelis terrified and armed and Palestinians oppressed
Mhm.
as a forward station, as a lesson to the rest of the region, as a bulwark. It's actually the way that the Jews were. I know I'm intellectualizing again.
It's
It's
okay.
the way that the Jews were always used. The Jews, the reason that the European kings brought the Jews into Europe and like set them, is because they were completely dependent. Everybody hates them, so they're completely dependent on the king. The king was like, these are my Jews. They're going to collect my taxes. And what are the Jews going to do? They only have the king to turn to. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And like that's the, I mean, America can try to make Egypt or Jordan or something as its client, but there's always the possibility that they're going to act up and decide not to. But where Israel being isolated, nobody. I'm sure no American president. I don't know about all their hearts, but you know what I mean. Like I'm sure they all like sincerely wished to end Israel's isolation, and also Israel's isolation very much in the American like um, what did Eisenhower say? The military industrial complexes
Mhm.
interests. Okay, back to feelings. So
I mean, you don't have to. I'm opening
not
up.
easy for me.
I'm opening up
Yeah.
the space which you can choose to take advantage of or not.
Um I don't know. So I mean, I think I don't know. So it's I was gonna say something else. Well, I don't know. I feel like mm, I have this big pull towards, abstraction. I have this big pull towards like turning myself into a character in a story. I mean, this, the question of like whether you should reach out to your Jewish and Arab friends, it's like, and Muslim friends, it's like, I keep saying that Trinity because Jews are both a ethnicity and
Mhm.
a religion, so it's a little odd. Of course, there's
Right.
a lot of Christian Palestinians too. Um, uh, it's been very weird and isolating. It's been very, like, a lot of what I've been, I got like 5 hours of sleep last night. A lot of it is like partly just like the, I mean, the fear at one remove of the people I know who are really directly involved. Like, I know people who really have like relatives captured.
Oh my God. I'm so sorry. That's so horrible.
I mean, I know people who have relatives who were, relatives who were shot
Yeah.
immediately the first day. There's something almost even, I don't know. I mean, you can't compare it, but like, it's really hard to imagine if. And so many of it is like young. It's like Aviva's age. I mean, it's like kids.
Yeah.
Young adults. And so a lot of it is just like this reflected horror, this like horror at a remove. And part of my whole why I've been having a screed on this podcast episode is how alienating it is then. And it's equally alienating. It's alienating to go online and people are like, well, fuck settler colonialists. And it's like, they didn't, but it's equally alienating. I went to some kind of political event because I wanted to be with Muslims. I don't know. I don't have a lot of Muslim friends in Basel, so I went to. We know, the liberal synagogue knows some of the. There's a lot of local Muslims in the Socialist Party, and I know them tangentially. Anyway, so I went to this pray-in with like the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims, and it was very funny because it was very clear, like. The most difficult thing about that was, again, like, not to knock on the Swiss Christians because I know they're doing their best, but like the degree of like, I don't know, like there was a speech one person gave where they just didn't mention, like, it was just so. I was the only guy wearing a kippah in this a yarmulke in this place, and I was offended because the speech was too Zionist for me, because the Swiss guy, and not too Zionist because again that's making the wrong sides. Too emotionally detached. Like, his speech was about how terrible the Hamas terrorists were, and one of the terrible things they were doing was using the Palestinians in Gaza as human shields. That was the extent of the mention of the Palestinians in Gaza. Like, them getting the fuck bombed out of them was not, like, he was too delicate to say that. I don't know. I was just like,
yeah,
that is his attempt to be supportive of Jews. I wanted to be like, it does not make me feel safer for you to invite a bunch of Muslims and just talk about and pretend that nothing is happening to them except Hamas is using them as human shields. Whatever the fuck that euphemism means. It means they're getting bombed. Like, you think that makes me feel safer?
Yeah. I think we're very bad at having these conversations. I feel like when I try to, I often get tongue-tied and do retreat to, platitudes, intellectualisms, or even like vagueness. I retreat to vagueness and that kind of language you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't even know why. It feels like too much to say, to talk about children's body parts. I mean, it's just too much. We're all going to just cry, and maybe that's what we should be doing,
Yeah, I mean, honestly, everybody. Honestly, I feel like the more people crying would be but I mean, particularly the people in continent intellectual. I don't know, like, so to some extent, I don't know. I just think my prescription is for you to, like, just ping your friends and be like, "Are you? I hope you're doing okay. I hope your friends and family are okay." I don't know.
Yeah. Kind of, I'm here if you want to talk about it, and if not, I wish I could give you a hug right now. It makes me crazy that you're on the other side of the planet. This is,
I'm really, I was really grateful that I have the ability to sort my thoughts out with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, it was like, yeah, it was like, that's perfect.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't know. I don't know if this episode is. I don't know. I'm still worried. I'm still worried. I still
yeah,
can
so I
just
think that's
run through my
interesting.
mind and see so much of what I've said that would be so hurtful to so many people that I love. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's we can put a framing around it. We can.
Well, I mean, I told them to leave in the beginning.
Yeah, you did.
All the goyim should stay and listen and learn not to take sides. You can be. You don't have to be neutral. Have an
Yeah.
opinion. Advocate for a solution. Just don't be like, I'm team this.
Right. Right.
It doesn't. I don't like it better when you're team Israel. When
Yeah.
you're like, yay, aircraft carrier. Fuck them up. Not making me feel safer.
I think maybe that's a good starting point. Like what would actually make people feel safer, right?
Yes. Yes. What would make people feel safer?
Yeah.
Yes.
And including on
I mean,
social
what
media,
helped, the thing that helped me, that has helped me so far, I mean, I really have been in a, just in a
Mhm.
not sleeping tizzy, my brain going a mile a minute. Like, I've been recording this podcast for the last 36 hours in my brain. Like I've been
Yeah.
making all these arguments to myself. And I don't know, like the best day was a day when I could just basically arrange to like spend the whole day listening to Jews. There was like a call in the morning with a support group where I got to listen to
Mm,
people, and then there was like a we had people over who were immediately affected. We had like uh, a thing for the teens at the synagogue where we're like, you could talk about it or we could be distracted, and they were like, movies. So we watched a
mhm.
movie.
Yeah.
and I was like, and so the couple of older teens were like, well, let's watch a horror movie, and I was like, I don't know if that's the right vibe. So we were trying to find a compromise of something they would think was cool, but also would be
Yeah.
not completely nuts. And I was like, what about science fiction action movie, something with some kind of cool? I was like, well, let's
Mhm.
look at a classic. I was like, have you guys seen like these? I was like, have you seen The Matrix? Because I was thinking of The Matrix as like the
Mm.
twist of like the reveal and the red pill and all that. So many phrases that like have gotten into the culture. And I was like, have you guys seen The Matrix? They hadn't seen The Matrix. I was like, we should watch The Matrix. So about 3/4 of the way of The Matrix, I was like, oh, this movie has a lot of people with guns. Like there's that scene where there's like they bring in this whoosh, all these guns, and they just go and shoot up all the cops. And then I was like, I don't know, maybe I might get some pushback from the parents about this choice. I forgot all the guns. I forgot how school shootery The Matrix is.
Oh,
Like
is
it's
it? I don't.
before.
Yeah.
Well, it's before that, right? It was before. It
Yeah.
was before Columbine. But they are like sunglasses, black trench coats, so many guns, shooting everybody.
Mm.
It's like I'm like, wow, this would not. You know,
Right.
the times have changed. Anyway, so yeah, I should have gone with Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Mm.
Or the Truman Show.
Yeah.
Or the Sixth Sense. I don't know. Maybe not all the shooting, but maybe it was good in a Bruno Bertelheim uses of enchantment catharsis
Maybe.
kind of way. I don't know.
I've been listening to this book Burnout, Emily Nagoski. I don't know if you've run across it, but it's talking about burnout generally that we're all going through, but specifically in a gendered sort of way.
Uh-huh.
And I wouldn't say there's anything that's exactly new to me, but
Yeah.
it's echoing a lot of things my therapist says and making it explicit. And she talks about completing the stress cycle is like the main impetus. Like it's the first chapter, and she's like, if you don't listen to anything else, this is the thing.
Mm-hmm.
The takeaway is
Yeah.
is sort of this: our animal brains cause our bodies to react physiologically to
Yeah.
threat as if we were needing to run away from a saber-toothed tiger.
Yeah.
And in the kinds of threat and trauma that we experience now, that's not helpful. And in fact, we suffer more from the stress than from the stressor. And so she talks about, and I'm still listening to it, but about like, what are the things that you can do to complete this stress cycle and come back to yourself? And a lot of it is physical. A lot of it is exercise. I mean, some of it is therapy, talking with somebody and having an emotional catharsis moment, but it's also, you know, laughter or but you know, going for a swim, whatever, like something that will let your body reset, that then makes space for your mind to reset. And so I just wanted to mention that, just because, you know.
And I feel like, I've been framing this discussion as like this, you know, what should you post on Facebook? But honestly, maybe get the fuck away from Facebook, because there's a way, you know what I mean? There's a way in which I think also that, you know, we've been talking about sort of circles of care and who's more affected and less affected, but also it is this guy at this thing I went to, there, one of the guys who spoke I really quite liked, who was a expert on extremism and was just the kindest, most inclusive guy. He said, you know, it's traumatizing for everyone. Like just to see this shit, just to know. Honestly,
I haven't watched the videos yet.
But like, not even. I mean, obviously, if you watch like people getting murdered, that is that's a real life snuff film. That is traumatizing, and also just like even that we keep it at bay. But anyway, so you know, like self-care, like your diet of internet information. Do not feel like you have to immerse yourself in the horror, and I don't know, like. I don't know, this is going to sound mystical, but in some sense, it's like we are all like, you know, a lot of the times on this podcast, we like to think about how narrow the world that we have had so far is compared to the possible anthropological space of all human existences, right? Like that's the Delaney Le Guin vibe. And like, there's some way in which like we are all traumatized when we find out that there is war. Like when we were kids and you're like, oh wait, like just thousands of people just kill each other because somebody tells them to, like that I feel like I don't think anybody emerges in our culture from that moment unscathed in a way. You know what I mean? Like you can imagine a world in which, I mean, you know, let us work for a world where that's a historical memory. You know what I mean? It's like once upon a time, you know, like you know.
Right, because it's I'm now trying to think about, like, it's a different kind of violence than political violence is a different kind of violence than, you know, neighbor violence, you know, or domestic violence, right? You know?
Well, I was, you know, I thought about this in terms of, you know, the Gombe chimpanzees. So we talked about this, like the Jane Goodall so Jane Goodall watched the chimpanzees in Gombe for a long time, and then they, you know, she was like, oh, they're like our peaceful, better nature, or whatever. Then they had a war. And so then she wrote about like chimpanzees do have war, and there was like this competing, these two factions. They, you know, killed members of the other faction or whatever. And I was, you know, that's called the Gombe War, and it's like chimpanzees have war. But on the other hand, I was like, but do chimpanzees have war? Because the experiment I want to do is when each chimpanzee who hit another chimpanzee or bit or, you know, murdered another chimpanzee in that context, are we sure that they weren't personally mad at that chimpanzee?
Right.
Like they had a grudge as a person, chimpanzee person, at that specific person? Because I don't think that's a war yet.
Right.
That's a feud, that's a fight, that's a grudge match, but like a war is when somebody tells you, go kill that guy. You don't know who that guy is. Right. You just know you're supposed to kill him. Like he's the other side. Like a war is you're killing somebody because because they belong to an idea. You know what I mean? Like there's a theory. Like it's a very human, like very, very forebrain activity. Like you are suppressing your natural tendency in a way. I don't know what's natural and what's not, but you know what I mean? It's like,
well, I think it requires an active identification, right? So Benedict Anderson, this is like the central, sort of one of the central points of his book, Imagined Communities, which is, you know, this post-colonial lit central text, where he's talking about the emergence of nation states, you know, and he asks the question of, you know, how is it possible for us to sort of get to an emotional point where we identify with a nation and are willing to go to war for it, to die and kill for it. and it kind of pulls it back to like, you need to, this is really simplifying his argument, but you need to basically identify it like this is your village and this is your family, right?
You need to expand. You need
You
to,
have to make this mental
like a
leap,
metaphorical projection.
of like, oh, this nation, is actually the same as if someone attacked my kid, right? And that's and all of
Well,
this
and you need to specifically, and you need to disidentify the opponent, right? You need to be like, that guy is not, right? Like, in a way that even is more so than you would, I don't know, what's when you say that about, like, you've mentioned it before, and that about this emergence of nations, and I do think there's that moment in history. It's the same moment we're talking about, where nations get, where there starts being a Germany and an Italy and a Poland and is when, it's like the people, like it's post-French Revolution, like this massive national militia. It's a breakthrough in the military, because rather than these feudal levies, you have like the people united are armed and carrying forward, the will of the nation. And that's a weird moment. But I'm thinking about before that, and like the intermediate step, like in feudalism, because in feudalism, you have huge battlefields of thousands of people. But what's interesting there is, in a way, you have this honor culture and you have this set of personal relationships where, in principle, I am going and fighting these guys. If I'm not saying if I'm a mercenary, but if I'm like, which is also a thing, but if I'm like a knight, or even a peasant militia, or a man at arms, Swiss guy with a halberd, like, I'm fighting. If it's feudal, like, I'm going to go kill this stranger because of my respect and love and fealty for my guy, my baron. And he's doing it because of it's personal. I know him. And I mean, this is the romanticized idea. This is the romantic. This is the rhetoric.
Right, or the Baron forced you into it, but yes.
Well, sure. I mean, yes. You may hate the Baron's fucking guts, but in the way, even if you hate the Baron's fucking guts, he's still your Baron. Like, right? Like, in a way, it's like it's a relationship. Like, yeah, maybe, but because I'm not saying feudalism was like one big happy, like, oh, I love my liege. Like, that's the rhetoric. But I'm saying he can't go around and kill each person. He can't go he's only one guy. If nobody, like, it's a chicken and egg problem, you say, well, his guys will make you, like, why do his man-at-arms follow him? Well, because the man-at-arms will make, otherwise, well, sure, if there's one man-at-arms tries to defect, the other ones are going to, but why do any of them? Like, why is there, and it's because there's a wider society and whatever, and I mean, I'm not saying it's not saying it's not coercive, but what I'm saying is, like, the model, like, you make some decision to either defect and run off and be a bandit and say, I'm not going to play this game, or you're like, I'm gonna stay a man at arms. And when you stay the man at arms, you're at least playing along with his rhetorical structure. And to some extent, I think often you feel it, like the same way that people feel patriotism for a nation. Like, even though the nation is drafting them and sending them to war, plenty of them, and murdering them, and lots of people are like, fuck this, I don't want to be drafted. But plenty of them are like, Old Glory. So I'm saying the guy, it's to reduce cognitive dissonance, you could buy into the feudalist narrative. And the feudalist narrative is, that's my baron, and I have pledged my loyalty to him. Maybe I don't even like him personally, but it's a matter of honor that I follow his lead because I owe him a duty of whatever. And what I was trying to say about this chain is, I know him personally, and he knows the Earl, and the Earl knows and has given his sword and pledged his fealty to the Duke, and the Duke to the King, and this king is mad at the other king. So it's actually chimpanzees fighting each other because they're mad at that guy, but it's been hierarchized into this web where I don't know the guy that I'm killing, but I do know that I do know the guy who knows the guy who knows the guy who knows the guy who wants to kill the guy who wants to kill these guys. And you know what I mean? It's not like abstraction. It's not like France and Germany. It's like specifically this web of individual relationships in which each link in the chain, like, is an actual relationship that the person is not a pure abstraction. This is before the moment you're talking about when people can invest themselves in pure abstractions. This is kind of like, and people did that before with religion and stuff, but like feudalism is an interesting intermediate case where it is kind of like, you do the person who's, so there's this, and I'm sure, of course, that's how it's implemented a lot today when you have soldiers going out and they know they're, there's also a hierarchy and a chain of command, and but it's funny that the rhetoric in feudalism wasn't, we are all members of the nation. It is, I have given my sword to you in a specific, anyway, I don't know where I'm going with that. I just thought that was interesting.
I do think it's interesting. I think we could do a tangent on that.
I guess I'm just saying it's interesting the ways that we had to hack our brains in order to make war. Like there's
Right.
a series of steps of figuring out how to get human beings to make war, because
Right.
I
It makes
don't actually think it's that.
I think
There's
you're making me
it is
think of.
not inevitable.
So I feel like if I'm remembering right, Octavia Butler, right, in her Imago trilogy, had this sort of premise that humanity had a fatal flaw, right? And
Right,
that was
about
what,
hierarchy, and
and
yeah,
it
we
was
talked about that.
hierarchy. So I think
Yeah.
this is maybe connected to that, right? This kind of question of like, if we are natural, if we naturally, I don't know, if we have a tendency towards hierarchizing and saying this person is above this person and we should pay attention to these people and do what they tell us to do. I'm not quite sure I understand what she meant by hierarchy, but I feel like this could connect to it, and kind of a science fictional question, I suppose, is can we culturally evolve beyond that? Is it possible for us
I mean,
to,
I think there. I mean, if you
yeah.
believe the archaeology and the book I keep nagging you to read that you told me to shut up about
I
so many times
started it.
after I said so many times, Riscon. Okay. Well, if you believe the archaeology in there, which I'm sure it's debated and it's a generalist view and
Mhm.
whatever, but I think there are like sometimes periods in the archaeological record where there's just like no war for a few centuries, like or longer. Like
Mhm.
it was just like this particular group of people, like where war was a at wide scale war with like because you could kind of tell because it's like for a while there's like fortifications and burned
Yeah,
earth
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
corpses that have with like blunt trauma and slashed and whatever. And then
Yeah,
there's a while there's not. And in those sometimes centuries, it was like, well, that was a distant memory. That's like our memory of like the Black Plague or like American chattel
my,
slavery. It
I
was
mean,
like, yeah, that was back then.
I could be, I haven't looked at this in great detail, but my understanding is that um, Sri Lanka, which is a small island and
Yeah.
didn't have a huge population, but was a generally a peaceful multi-ethnic society for close to 2000 years. There were individual kings trying to gain territory in various points, but and there was,
Hmm.
so there were some political maneuverings, but a lot of the time, I mean, for
Yeah. Yeah.
hundreds of years, people could live in peace.
And there
And
also seems like there's a cycle of you mentioned briefly like about targeting of civilians and so on. And
Mhm,
there's I don't want to go too much into that again because we're wrapping up. But there is a cycle of symbolic war and total war. There are times in
mhm,
history, and it's like marbled throughout history. It's not like a grand narrative of like, oh, agriculture and then this. No, there's some times when people have like there's like counting coup. There was like
mhm.
like Plains Indians would have a type of warfare where you'd go and tap the guy on the chest with a stick. It's almost like capture the flag, and that meant he lost. You
Mhm.
didn't have to kill him. You'd
Yeah,
made your point. I got so close to you because it's a short stick. I have a long spear and they have this short stick. And if I'm so badass that I can tap your chest with the stick, I could have killed
yeah,
you. Right.
yeah,
And there's a way in which that kind of symbolic, or like, I don't know, the Olympic Games being like the way that they ended wars in ancient Greece, like this kind of like symbolicization of war, and also like the rules of war being like, well, no poison gas, well, no, shooting non-combatants, well, no, and that there are periods where there's a sort of um, level of agreement, like a consensus has been where war has been constrained. And then there are periods where that falls apart and you get like total war, scorched earth, like just
yeah.
kill everybody. And that's I don't know. I feel like we've watched that in our lifetimes. I mean, I feel like I even in my lifetime, I mean in my parents' lifetime, we went from a time when America declared wars by vote of Congress to a period where war was an executive prerogative. And then in my time, we went from a time where there were discrete wars that we would have and then stop having and then not for a while. And there were some degree, I mean, Vietnam was not like a great example of obviously they were Agent Orange and, so it's not like we were great at the rules of war. We were also assassinating people throughout the 60s. But like, it feels like there was the Bush era ushered in both a further collapse of the notion of the rules of war, right? Like torture
Mhm.
was back explicitly on the table you know, and also and targeted assassination in a wide scale, and also like the end of wars ending. Like we
Mhm.
haven't not been at war since then. My children have never
Yeah.
been live in a war. I don't know. Will they ever live in a world where America's not a war? Like it's just you know what I mean? Like it's like it
Mhm.
became background noise, and that is a scary inflection point.
No, I was trying to remember the phrase. I was reading a news article that Israel's current policy in Gaza, like in the new policy of, as of the last few days, right, is this blockade of not allowing water and food and so on into it. It
Yeah.
was something like, it's not total occupation, but it was something like that. It had the word total in it, and
Yeah.
it was as part of the, with the goal being supposedly to destroy Hamas, but it's again that kind of comprehensive, like, we're all in at this point and there are no other options, right? Like it's
And I think that there's this way in which I think people often, like, again, to return, not to pick on your question, but the is
mm,
violence ever justified, which sort of puts the line at like total turn the other cheek pacifism or not. And I feel like I'm reminded of this medieval Islamic quote of some caliph or sultan or something who said, where my word suffices, I do not use my whip. Where my whip suffices, I do not use my sword, which is not pacifist. Clearly not. Clearly not. But has this level of like nuanced restraint. Like, what if that just seems like a good, like, again, not even to get into the morality of it. That's just a good strategy. Just
mhm.
that's like if you want to achieve, if at the end of this conflict if you wish to have a conflict with someone and coerce them, but end up in a state where you've restored a livable situation for everyone, they've yielded, you've accepted their yielding, you should minimize the amount of force you use. That's just
But again, that gets
smart.
back to
Do you
like
know what I
this.
mean? Like, and
Yes,
there's
but
the
if your
yeah,
governments like don't have that goal, right? If their goal is not,
exactly,
if their goal
exactly.
isn't a
If
livable
which
situation
is
for
why
everybody.
like once you have an ideological like acceptance of forever war, it's just like it's going to be war, then you no longer have that constraint. But yeah, I think that uh it's almost like that. There are periods where, like, when the Red Cross and the Geneva Convention, all that, there's just like periods where there's kind of like some kind of concerted effort to construct some kind of house for war to live in, at least, or some kind of ways that you can back out of things. There's also like the whole thing in the Cold War was like the red phone and the meanwhile, lots of, not to say that lots of horrifying proxy wars and brutality wasn't happening, but some kind of attempt to be like, these are the ways that we slow the train down. Like all the things we do
Mm,
not to have a nuclear war, which we've been pretty successful at. We've been able to
right.
have a nuclear war for quite a while, and yet we only had one, and it was pretty short. When we dropped the bomb in Japan.
Mm,
But the like, I don't know, like safeguards, guardrails, and just being like, and I feel like, so the last thing I'll say, I sent that thing from Rabbi Danya Rutenberg. I
mhm.
liked her
I
take.
like
We
that.
could
I like
link
that a
something in
lot.
the show
Yeah.
notes. And she had a follow-up article we can also link in the show notes, where she was talking about peacemakers, like the people, all the different, there's a roundup there of all kinds of people who are Israeli and Palestinian cooperative efforts, grassroots people who've been trying to
Mhm.
build bridges and make peace all this time, all the you know bereaved parents and without support from their governments, and in most cases, and um and she was talking about sort of the parallel, or she was quoting somebody who was talking about this parallel between the kind of work that parenting requires and
Mm,
like its attitude towards conflict and coercion and healing
mm,
and muddy and being okay with not total victory, or with muddy compromises, or with
mm,
like that the muscle of what you have to do to live well with a child, and like not necessarily yield to them, but also think constantly about what will keep them well. You know what I mean? Like that muscle is like, that is like, I don't know, there's just a lot of statistics that if you have like, I mean, mothers, like people have been doing on duty childcare. It's not biological. I don't mean mothers in a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
biological or gendered way, but just like it's mostly women. The people who've been doing the on duty childcare, if they are involved with peacemaking, it is far more successful. Like just statistically, like if they're involved in, because if you have the guys with suits, they think about the lines on the map and who wants what, and brokering a deal that like
Well,
minimizes, saves
and it-
face.
and I would argue that it's good parenting specifically, right? Because
Yes.
there's a form of disciplinarian parenting, and I feel like we're in the midst of in I'm on the board of my local high school, and we're in the midst of a transition there as well between a sort of disciplinarian mode and restorative justice, et cetera, so on, and a kind of better
Well, I
model
mean, here's the thing.
of taking care of the children, right?
Here's the thing. I think there's a range. I think it is good parenting. I think that is matters. But I think that there's two issues. One is ideologies of parents and techniques of parents and so on, right? So there's like disciplinarian versus permissive versus sort of balanced parenting or whatever. That's one thing. Another thing is like
well, I guess I mean disciplinarian.
Effective.
Disciplinarian in the sense of, maybe I mean authoritarian.
Authoritarian.
I guess what I'm
saying is I think that there's probably a range, and if you are a very consensus-driven parent, that's probably even more practice in like the happy medium and whatever. But I believe, honestly, that even if you're like, we go back to like a 1950s situation and you have the option of a bunch of wait till your father gets home 50s housewives or their husbands, I still think that even if their model is authoritarian, they inevitably end up having to practice the skills of compromise and tolerance and whatever. Like, unless they're just really abusive. Do you know what I mean? Unless it's just like but I mean, I'm not saying I'm not saying there's no failure mode. I'm saying a bell curve. If you have a bell curve if you have a random village and they haven't gotten the memo about not spanking your kids, but you have a bell curve of how good they are at it. I'm just saying, anyway, I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think I may be closer to that than you are in terms of,
Sure.
The parenting experiences I've had. And I don't think I would say abusive in their terms, right? I guess I would say it's a authoritarian model that kind of assumes that the parent is right and knows what's best for the child.
Sure.
And that then makes it easy to justify a lot of what one might see as terrible and agency denying behavior. And I think that's where you can maybe make an analogy to the governments and the people, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, I grew up with, I know there's a difference in the experience that we had, but definitely I did not grow up with the rhetoric of like, oh, well, we all have an equal say. Like, it was definitely like the parents are right because of their parents. Anyway, it's more like a gendered experience over time. I'm not saying there's not a range, but I'm saying like the average kinds of skills that have been asked of people who go out and work outside the house in a hierarchy or in a, or in some kind of competitive environment, like that kind of skills versus the kind of skills of dealing with, even if your plan is for them to do exactly what you say because you're the boss, the skills that it takes to deal with a 3-year-old. You know what I mean? Like is it different? Anyway, whatever. So, but yes, I'm mostly talking about nonviolent communication, nonviolent parenting, restorative justice, that kind of thing. But I think it's interesting that it's that rang true for me, that the muscle of like we clearly are going to want to end up, even if we're in the middle of this conflict, we are if you have the model that the other person is not going anywhere and that you're connected to one another and that you will only ultimately be happy if you can live together well, that you are that is essentially like what that is essentially a kind of saying that you are family.
No, I agree. I think that's and so much of what makes war possible is painting the other as not fully human. And so if you can get away from that and acknowledge not just their humanity but also their relatedness to you and see them as family, I do think that's it's the opposite of the kind of shift that that we were talking about before, right? Where you identify with a set group of people as family, and then the people on the other side are not family.
But I think this is true, but I also want to point, because I think often this is the kind of thing that you can easily pronounce from outside. I do want to point to this experience that I have of this conflict, and I don't know if your thing is. I mean, I actually have. We had a bunch of Sri Lankan, some Sinhalese, and some Tamil on the podcast at one point, and I got the same vibe, which is that actually often the people on the ground who are being forced to fight one another by the setup, they know their family. Like, they're often the least confused. Like, they are pitted against one another, and the costs are high. And out of fear for their own immediate, real, actual family, they are willing to say, you got to break an omelet to make a few eggs and whatever. But actually, the vibe, if you talk to people far away who are reading it on the news and like, all these, like, there was so much of the vibe at this thing I went to with the European Christians, where they were like, you sometimes got the subtext that they were doing this to make sure that stuff didn't happen, like that you rowdy, like your conflict shouldn't spill over here, like, you know what I mean? It was kind of like, and the picture, I don't know, it's just like it's actually easy from far away. It's the easiest from far away as a judge, an observer, profiting from empire, to really pick sides and to really, dehumanize. And to some extent, the people, I don't know, I got to say, like, the people the most wrapped up in it feel very strongly. And maybe, like you said, if somebody hurts your kid, like, I'm not saying they're feeling peaceful, but there's some level in which they know, and I'm not saying they don't entertain the fantasy that the people who keep hurting them will just go away, but there is the vibe that it's like, we are actually connected, Anyway, I better go.
I know Ben has to go to a family thing, actually, so we'll wrap for today. And obviously, we have not solved the world's problems, but
we were not trying to.
Yes.
I have finally learned not to try to do that.
Yay.
I'm very proud of myself. But you were here for me.
Yeah.
Which is more important.
That was the goal. But I actually do still have to, like, try and convince myself not to try to solve the world's problems.
Yes, I know.
I'm working on it.
Some things are within your grasp, and I don't want you to stop being the Energizer Bunny of tackling all the things around you.
I think here, this is a good situation of, like, where I'm sort of like, okay, the most, like, right now, what I want to do is do no harm, right? So,
and I mean, you can. I am not saying, when I say we can't, it's the figuring out how to solve the world problem. The emphasis on figuring out. I'm not saying don't take the next step. I'm not saying don't. I'm not trying to let anybody off the hook. I'm not saying that anybody should be like, well, I don't know, I'm neutral. I'm not. It's not what I'm saying. What I'm, fight hard for peace. But what I'm saying is, you don't need to figure. Other people will figure it out. I know that my next action is to try to be as honest as I can, listen, not shield myself from the pain, and like just say really simple, dumb things like, everybody's children matter.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I kind of needed to like work through that and get to that point, because a week ago I was like, well, why should I say that? And now I'm like, you actually have to say it. I mean, it's
really, well, I mean, the thing is, I don't know that there's any, as I said, I'm not posting on Facebook because or on social media, there's nothing I could say that will not. I do feel like everything there's no way for me to be just like, everybody's children matter and not have that sound filtered through this echo chamber of, like, I can't read the room. I don't know who's reading this. For so many people, that will land as minimizing their pain and brushing it off and anodyne, and do you know what I mean? Like, unless I have a whole podcast to talk about it, I don't see how I can. I mean, I'm not saying don't say anything, but I'm just saying it's so hard in that context not to. Do you know what I mean? Like, anyway. All right, I gotta go.
All right. Thank
everybody. You so much.
This has been
Mohanraj. This has been
Mohanraj and Rosenbaum are humans.
Humans, that's right. Not chimpanzees.
All right. Bye.
See you later. Bye.